Good afternoon, and welcome to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, to our historic courthouse. I am Chief Judge Anna Blackburn Rigsby, and it's my honor on this historic day to welcome you all to the portrait unveiling of former Chief Judge Eric T. Washington, who served this court with distinction for 3 consecutive terms as the Chief Judge from May of 2005 until March of 2017. He's our longest serving Chief Judge. I am joined on the bench and in the well of the court today by my active, senior, and retired colleagues of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, including some of our past Chief Judges. And I'd like to take just a moment to introduce you to them. Our active judges are Judge Stephen Glickman, Judge John Fisher, Judge Phyllis Thompson, Judge Corrine Beckwith, Judge Catherine Easterly, Judge Roy McLeese. Our senior judges, Judge John Farron, Judge Frank Nebeker, Judge John Stedman, Judge Michael Farrell, Judge Vanessa Ruiz, who was unable to join us today, and of course, Chief Judge Eric T. Washington. Our former Chief Judges who join us today are Judge Ted Newman, retired, Judge William Pryor, who was unable to be here, who is still serving us as a senior judge, Judge Judith W. Rogers from the DC Circuit, retired from this court and former Chief Judge, and Judge Anise Wagner, former Chief Judge and retired judge. We're also joined by retired judges James, or Jim Belson as we call him, Judge Inez Smith-Reed, and Judge Emmett Sullivan, who you all know retired from this court before going to the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. So please welcome them. We're also honored that Chief Judge Washington's lovely wife, Cheryl, and his daughter, Erica, herself a recent law school graduate, are joining us today here in the courtroom. I'd also like to make a special acknowledgement of Chief Judge Washington's oldest daughter, Lindsay, who is living in Spain, his son, Ricky, who is a student at the University of Wisconsin, and his parents, Drs. and Mrs. Washington, who are all joining us because we are live streaming this presentation today. So to them, I give a special shout out and a welcome. I also would like to welcome Judge Washington's brother, Stuart Washington, who is here in the courtroom, and his niece, Whitney Washington. Now, we are also joined by many special guests today, and I think Chief Judge Washington would be quite upset if I went row by row, person by person, and recognized everyone, because each of you are special to him and special to the family. But I do have to take a moment and recognize some of our special visiting guests. So I hope that you will indulge me. First, I will recognize our local members of the judiciary, the Honorable Chief Judge Robert Morin of the District of Columbia Superior Court, and all of the judges on the District of Columbia Superior Court who are here today, who are former colleagues of Chief Judge Washington, and our executive officer of the DC courts, Ann Wicks, and the deputy executive officer, Dr. Cheryl Bailey. I also recognize our clerk of the court, Mr. Julio Castillo, and our deputy clerk, Mr. Herbert Risson. Now, we are honored today by many special visiting and distinguished judges from the federal judiciary. I mentioned the Honorable Judith W. Rogers, our former Chief Judge, now on the DC Circuit, the Honorable Robert Wilkins of the United States Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit, and the Honorable Gregory Katsas from the United States Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. I'd like to give a special welcome to Chief Judge Beryl Howell of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, and the Honorable Emmett Sullivan, and the Honorable Tanya Chutkan from the United States District Court of the District of Columbia. Now, I understand Chief Judge Washington's close friend, the Honorable Eric Holder, may be joining us if he is not already here, but I wanted to recognize him The Honorable Jesse Liu, the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. The Honorable Natalie Ludaway, the Chief Deputy of the DC Attorney General's Office. Avis Buchanan, the Director of the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia. And I want to extend a special thanks to the Honorable Kimberly Knowles of the District of Columbia Superior Court, a former law clerk of Chief Judge Washington's, and one of the conveners and coordinators of this event today. Moxie, or Moxilla Upandiyi. We practiced that, Moxie, I'm sorry. Who is a partner at the Venable Law Firm and one of Chief Judge Washington's former law clerks and one of the coordinators of this wonderful event. Many of Chief Judge Washington's former law clerks are here today, and I welcome you all back and thank you all for your service to the Court of Appeals. And finally, I'd like to specially recognize our artist, who you'll hear more from and more about later, Mr. Bradley Stevens. I could stop there with my remarks, but I can't. This is a special occasion, and as many of you know, Chief Judge Washington is a student of history. History is one of his hobbies and one of his passions. And as you may have noticed on your way in here, that's very fitting, because in the atrium right outside of this courtroom, you may have noticed the portraits of many of the former chief judges of the DC Court of Appeals, adorning the walls along the corridor before you enter the courtroom. And it's only fitting that Chief Judge Washington's portrait will soon be there, along with his predecessors. Although they are beautiful pieces of artwork, they most importantly symbolize the exceptional leadership that this court has had over the years. Each portrait is a window into the history of the DC Court of Appeals and the men and women who served as chiefs. By assembling the portraits of these diverse leaders, we acknowledge and reflect on the important work of this court in service to the people whose cases we hear, to our community, and to our country. And we also mark the progression of history. This court, as some of you may know, this building was originally designed in 1820 and has served as the first city hall and as a historic courthouse to many previous predecessors of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. Former President Teddy Roosevelt had an office here when he served as the local recorder of deeds, and former abolitionist Frederick Douglass had an office here when he served as the Marshal for the United States. So these walls have seen much history. And so we are all excited that Chief Judge Washington's portrait will soon join the ranks of his predecessors. Like his predecessors, he's had a long history of service in both the private sector and the public sector. He was nominated by President William Jefferson Clinton as an associate judge of the DC Superior Court and served from 1995 to 1999. He was nominated again by President Clinton in 1999 to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. And in May of 2005, he was designated by the DC Judicial Nomination Commission to serve as Chief Judge. He served 3 consecutive terms as Chief Judge of this court for 12 years in that role. In March of 2017, Chief Judge Washington took senior status, and in his new role as a senior judge, he continues his active and enthusiastic service to this court and his role in promoting access to justice throughout the country. During his 12 years as Chief Judge, he epitomized the values of our DC courts: accountability, excellence, integrity, respect, and transparency. Chief Judge Washington is a principled and visionary leader, and his actions have been guided by his unwavering commitment to ensuring access to justice for all. He is also a chief among chiefs, and as many of you know, he served as the president of the Conference of Chief Judges for all of the state courts of this country. In that capacity, he was able to provide leadership and direction to state courts across the country on important issues of access to justice, bail reform, and in convening the inaugural meeting of the National Advisory Board on Community Engagement in State Courts to promote public trust and confidence in the judiciary. As one of my favorite poets, Rudyard Kipling, once said, to paraphrase him a little bit, he can walk with kings, but he has never lost his common touch. And if you've ever walked anywhere with him, you know what I mean, because every few steps, people stop him to say hello, and he takes time to speak to everyone. He is thoughtful and kind and considerate. He's a colleague and a gentleman. Chief Judge Washington, I want to thank you once again for your outstanding service, for the innumerable contributions that you've made to the DC Court of Appeals, to the many people who live and work in the District of Columbia, we are all honored to serve, for your work in the District of Columbia and across this nation, and your contributions to the administration of justice, we say thank you. And on behalf of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, we proudly accept the portrait, which will soon be unveiled, and we are excited that the portrait will mark your unique place in the history of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals and the District of Columbia court system. It's my distinct honor and privilege to congratulate you and to say thank you once again. At this time, I'd like to introduce Moxie Upandiye, partner at the Venable Law Firm and one of Chief Judge Washington's former law clerks.
Good afternoon, Chief Judge Blackburn-Rigsby and honorable judges of this court. My name is Moxie Upadhyay, and I had the privilege of clerking for Chief Judge Washington from 2003 to 2005. Judge Washington has asked that I keep my speech brief, that I don't fuss over him too much, and that I keep it focused on the portrait. Chief Judge Washington always encouraged me, however, to question authority. And if I thought that the rules were unfair, to make a reasoned argument for departing from them. So, sorry, Judge. While I promise to make this brief, I can't make any promises about the other stuff because I don't think I'll have this great opportunity again. It's an honor to stand here to represent Chief Judge Washington's law clerks, who are all seated on this side of the courtroom. We are all acutely aware that we were given a unique opportunity when we got the offer to clerk for Judge Washington. I'm certain, because I've spoken to my fellow co-clerks, that each one of us has our own story of what made our time clerking for Judge Washington special, and why learning from him during our formative years was the foundation to any success we might have achieved later in our careers. For my part, I can tell you that while he did teach me a great deal, the most valuable lessons were those that I learned by watching the judge. And although he probably did not realize that his actions left such an indelible impression on me, it was for me then, as it is now, the best way to measure Chief Judge Washington's legacy on the people who came in contact with him, as well as this sacred institution. So, let's go down the list. Chief Judge Washington's intellectual rigor and tireless devotion to his duties. I learned early on that Chief Judge Washington could basically outwork any of us. I thought I could maybe the first week that I clerked for him, but I saw what it meant to be utterly and wholly devoted to your duties. And it wasn't only to his duties to getting the right result and achieving what he thought was a fair result grounded in the law, but also devotion to ensuring that the courts improve and that the experience of litigants are considered as policies are made and as he led the court as chief. As I said, Chief Judge Washington could outwork any of us, and whether he realized it or not, on certain Friday evenings when my co-clerk Shamika and I could not take it anymore. We would go into his office with a series of non-urgent messages and errands just to see if he had packed up his briefcase. And he did work very hard, and it's a true testament to how much he cares about this institution, how much he cares about the people of the District of Columbia. I still don't think I can outwork him, by the way, and I stopped trying about a year in. If any of you has attempted to make the one-block walk from the former DC Court of Appeals building at the Moultrie Courthouse to the Subway restaurant 1 block away, you'll know what I mean by when I say that Judge Washington's accessibility and his openness to meeting everyone was and is one of the most important aspects of who he is. And I believe the chief referred to that in her opening remarks. It's very true. At the time, we just wanted to get our sandwich, but we were stopped along the way. I realized how important it was that anyone in the courthouse felt that they were able to go up to the chief, to speak to him about any problems they had, and that he listened, and he truly did listen. So that 1 block walk, I came to love going to lunch with him just to Subway and meeting all the people along the way, because they truly are the people that he touched, and he kept that duty very sacred to him. Chief Judge Washington always embraced change, and although I won't give it away because that aspect of who he is reflected in his portrait, I can say that although there are principles of law that are immutable and that he always believed should be fixed, he also believed that the court should embrace change, and that change should always be recognized and made for the benefit of the public. Chief Judge Washington also believed in fairness, always has. All cases were to be given the same rigorous approach. Whenever we were stuck on a question, he went back to the mission of the DC Court of Appeals, and he would always say to us, are we acting in a way that is open to all, trusted by all, and provides justice for all? We would often find a way to the answer once we went back to that guiding principle. And of course, his sense of humor got us through many, many long days, and remains, for me, one of my favorite qualities about the chief. On a personal note, the chief has served as a model of a true friend for the last 15 years. Through challenges and good times, he's always been the first to call, always the person to make time to lend an ear or wish me well. And I know that if I don't call him every 2 weeks, he's calling my office. When I don't answer in my office, he's calling my cell phone. Sometimes he calls my husband, Kevin, who's sitting back there. Where is she? Where is she? She hasn't called me for 2 weeks. That's the sign of a true friend, someone who wants to make sure that you're doing okay, even if there's no sign that you're not doing okay. Setting aside the great opportunity I had to clerk for him, I've been blessed, most of all, to count him as a friend, and I know that you all have as well. So in closing, Chief Judge Blackburn-Rigsby, on behalf of Chief Judge Washington's law clerks and members of the legal community, it is with great pride that we ask the court to accept this portrait as a reflection of our love and respect for the chief, his service and devotion to the courts, and the great legacy he has left on this institution. Thank you.
Thank you for those warm remarks. Now we'll have Judge Kimberly Knowles. And Kimberly, Judge Knowles, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention your wonderful judicial administrative assistant, Khadijah Brown. I don't know if Ms. Brown is here, but I know she worked tirelessly to help you in these efforts.
So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. In anticipation of this event, several people have approached me and asked, what are you going to say? What are you going to talk about Judge Washington? And since March 2017, Judge Washington has been on his retirement tour. And so there have been lots of speeches and lots of awards given. And so I wanted to talk about something that I don't think has been spoken about, the perspective of a law clerk. And what we as the law clerks saw in Judge Washington and what we learned from him. So, what can I say about my judge? I get made fun of still to this day because that's who he is to me. He is my judge. And technically, I guess we are colleagues because we're on DC courts together, but he's so much more than that to me. Judge Washington is the most, for me, and I'm speaking for many of the clerks. I'm giving my experience, but it's reflected in all of the clerks in their own experience. Judge Washington, to me, is the most important person, one of the most important people, aside from my parents and my son. He's had the greatest impact on my life. And I'm sure my co-clerks have the same feeling. Now, I've been lucky enough to have jobs in my legal career that I've loved. Many years at the U.S. Attorney's Office, now my job as a judge at Superior Court, and I can say without hesitation that my favorite job was as a judicial law clerk for Judge Washington. It was also the lowest paying job at $23,000 a year before taxes, but it by far was my favorite job. And part of the reason why it was my favorite job, and probably the biggest reason why it was my favorite job, is because I was working with Judge Washington every day. Got to learn from him, talk to him. And as a law clerk, we all learn things. We learned how to be a professional. We learned how to prepare, learned how to try a case, learned how to treat people in the courthouse, from the courtroom clerk to court personnel, from the lawyers to the defendants to the witnesses, showing everyone with respect at every moment. We also learned things like not taking yourself too seriously, having fun while you work, and that it's not about being right, it's about getting it right. Judge Washington led by an example, and it's an example that I and my fellow clerks have aspired to follow every day from the beginning of our legal careers. Starting, I'm not going to go too far down memory lane, but back in 1998, I was a young assistant U.S. attorney, and I was assigned to the domestic violence unit. Judge Washington was a judge in that unit, and I sat around. This is in the old cert list days, so Chief Judge Morin, this is not what happens now. But we had been sitting around on the cert list from about 11 o'clock that morning, waiting for a judge to pick up the case. I had a case. And at 3:30, I got the dreaded call. Judge Washington has picked up your case, report to courtroom 101. And in my mind, I said, I know I told him to recuse himself from all of my cases. This can't be happening. So I took the walk down the hall to courtroom 101, only thinking he was going to announce, I'm sorry you've been waiting all day. I'm not going to be able to handle this case. Are there any preliminary matters I can work out for you? No, that's not what happened. Came before the court. He announced she was my law clerk just a year ago, but I believe I could be fair, so I don't have a problem presiding over this case. All right, strike one. So then he turns to the litigants, turns to the defendant and defense counsel who's still practicing today, and says, do you have a problem with me presiding over this case? So I'm like, yes, come on. Absolutely not, Your Honor. You can proceed. So at that point, the dreaded moment happened. I've tried many cases over the years, and this is in retrospect, obviously, from sex offense cases and insanity cases, children. The scariest moment of my life was when Judge Washington then said, I'll hear the government's opening statement. And I remember distinctly taking a big deep breath, trying to speak louder than my heart, because I could hear it, and saying, Your Honor, this case is about, and then the defense counsel stands up and says, Your Honor, we're going to plead guilty. That was a wonderful moment. But it was such a scary moment because it was a scary moment to me because I wanted to make my judge proud. I was afraid that I was going to do something that later on he would say, Kim, you know I taught you better than that. And 20 plus years later, I still have that feeling. Fast forward to October 11th, 2018. That would be yesterday. I was on leave, checking my email, and there was an email from the Court of Appeals saying a slip opinion in one of the cases that I had tried. Clicked it, opened it up, didn't recognize the name, so I was like, okay, let me see who my panel is. Judges Glickman, Judge Fisher, Senior Judge Washington. I felt that pounding of my heart again. I did feel that pounding. So then I scrolled down. Opinion written by Senior Judge Washington. And I said, I really hope this turns out well because I have to speak tomorrow. I then fast forwarded, scrolled down to the end, saw affirmed, have not read the opinion because I'm afraid that he was going to ask me some questions and present to me, why did you do this? So I can now say that I didn't read it, so I don't remember the case, Judge. But honestly, what this shows is that 20 years, 21, however many years later, we want to make you proud. Excuse me. So, on behalf of the law clerks, myself, I want to say it was an honor to be your law clerk, to work with you, to learn from you. And I guess now, after sharing this portrait, I'm going to have to share you with the rest of the District of Columbia. But you will still and always be my judge.
Thank you, Judge Knowles. So many people here in this room share the admiration and affection for your judge. But I've heard them all say that he was their judge, so I don't know. You've got to figure that out. I see our new acting clerk of the court for the Superior Court, Ms. Sabrina Dempson, here, and I just wanted to recognize your presence. Now we will hear comments from the Honorable Judge Stephen Glickman.
Thank you. By his own account, which I shall embellish, Eric Washington was launched on his career in the law by his youthful exposure to the exploits of the famous trial attorney, Perry Mason. Eric admits that Mr. Mason made it look pretty cool to be a lawyer. So it is easy to imagine how a young, smart, impressionable fellow envisioning himself as a future Perry Mason would commence his legal education by immersing himself in the case studies of Earl Stanley Gardner. Fortunately for all of us, though, as Eric grew up, he went on to read other works of jurisprudence. His horizons expanded, and his heroes changed. Eric chose to emulate real lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, lawyers who struggled to achieve equal justice for all through law. Eric grew to see and to practice law as an honorable and challenging profession with unparalleled opportunities for advancing that goal. And he came to see being a judge as a high calling in which he could work to apply the law fairly to everyone and to improve the administration of justice. And so it is that we gather today for this ceremony honoring Eric with the public presentation of his portrait. This court will display it with pride. It is the portrait of an exceptional jurist, one who rose to such distinction and made such contributions to the district and the nation that, among many other things that are too numerous to mention, he became the longest-serving chief judge in the history of our court system and was elected president of the National Conference of Chief Justices of the United States. The gift of the portrait is a testament to Eric's accomplishments, and even more, to the affection and high esteem in which he is held by so many, most especially, I think it is fair to say, by his law clerks, as you have heard, and by his fellow judges who have worked so closely with him. Eric, you and I have been colleagues on this court for 20 years. And my friend, it has been my privilege and good fortune to have the benefit of your leadership and counsel. I speak for all your colleagues here in congratulating you on today's richly deserved honor. And on their behalf, as well as my own, I want to add a few words of appreciation. Inasmuch as Eric's portrait is, formally and fundamentally, the portrayal of him as this court's chief judge during the period 2005 to 2017, I'll begin by reminding everyone of Eric's enduring achievements in that role. First, at the time Eric was elevated to chief, this court had one seemingly intractable, serious problem. No bones about it, the length of time it took to decide cases on appeal. It was Eric who deserves the lion's share of the credit for cutting that Gordian knot by prioritizing the elimination of our appellate backlog, enlisting every judge in the effort, and implementing innovative practices to achieve efficient case management and docket control. Eric changed the way we do business and led us to reduce the average time of cases on appeal by a third. Second, Eric oversaw a variety of initiatives to move the Court of Appeals and its judges into the 21st century, including the adoption of genuine strategic planning for the court's future, live streaming of oral arguments and proceedings like this one, e-filing, remote docket access, and up-to-date technology to enhance our productivity and public access to the court. We are now judges with our cases and everything we need, now ready to hand with our iPads. Although some of us may have kicked and screamed, and one judge who has been with Eric for 20 years still mourns the loss of his favorite old word processing program, Eric knows who that judge is. We all have been blessed by his changes. Third, look around you. Eric oversaw the renovation of our North Campus buildings and the long-awaited resurrection of this architecturally and historically significant landmark in the nation's capital. Today, the historic courthouse once more serves as a beautiful, dignified edifice that physically embodies our aspirations to deliver equal justice under law. It is the most fitting home to the district's highest court. Fourth, perhaps Eric's highest priority as chief judge was expanding access to justice for everyone in the courts of the District of Columbia. Eric worked with the Access to Justice Commission and pursued numerous initiatives that contributed to this end. He communicated and instilled a clear vision of our shared goal, as you heard Moxie, I think, say, our shared goal of a court system open and accessible to all, trusted by all, dispensing justice efficiently and effectively to all. Last, but by no means least, the chief judgeship was a platform for Eric to emerge as a national leader in championing access to justice issues, awareness of the importance of the rule of law and the role of courts in our democracy, and reforms in the administration of justice. For this, he has earned many honors and awards. Again, too many to enumerate here. I'll just note, as one signal example, that when the New York University Law Review in 2016 published the 22nd Justice William J. Brennan Jr. lecture on state courts and social justice, it was Eric's public address on pretrial justice reform. And of course, it was in recognition of Eric's commitment and effectiveness as a national spokesperson and innovator in these critically important areas that his peers in the 50 states elected him to serve a year as president of the Conference of Chief Justices. Now, it bears emphasizing that Eric did all this in addition to fulfilling his many time-consuming day-to-day responsibilities. Like the rest of us on the court, Eric had cases to hear and opinions to write. He wrote some of the most consequential and cited decisions issued by this court in the past 2 decades. As Chief Judge, Eric also was our judicial leader, which I admit was too often a process analogous to herding cats that had enjoyed too much catnip. Plus, of course, the chief headed the Joint Committee, the body that administers the entire District of Columbia court system. He represented the district courts in their relations with Congress, the other branches of the district government, and the District of Columbia Bar, and he was the public face of our courts. Eric somehow found the time and energy to do it all, and do it very well. Ultimately, it is Eric's character as a person and a judge that matters most. Eric cares not just about the law in the abstract, but about the law's impact on people in the real world. And during his entire time on the bench, Eric has displayed the qualities that go into making an exemplary judge, colleague, and leader of the court. Among them, a first-rate legal mind informed by an understanding of the human condition, humility and open-mindedness, patience and respect for others, tact and diplomacy, and the courage of his convictions. That Eric is the longest-serving chief in our history, that he was picked again and again to take the helm for an 11-year run, that no one ever opposed his candidacy to be chief, all that speaks volumes about his ability to inspire confidence and be someone his colleagues trusted, looked to for guidance, hearkened to, and followed. At times, it may have felt to him like herding cats, but as chief, Eric successfully strove to maintain an atmosphere of collegiality and harmony on the court. Every one of us was grateful for Eric's steady hand on the tiller. He is, to put it quite plainly, beloved by his judicial colleagues. So it will be a fine thing for us to have Eric's visage looking on as we continue the work here at the Court of Appeals in the years ahead. I like to think Eric's kind and steady gaze will strengthen our resolve and inspire us as we endeavor to live up to his standards of deportment and adjudication, and our oaths to administer justice fairly, impartially, and in accordance with the law to all who come before us. Now, in a few moments, Mr. Bradley Stevens, the eminent artist who has painted Eric's portrait, will be presenting it. Anticipating this, I found myself meditating about what artistic style is most apropos to capture the essence of a judge on canvas. It seems to me, and perhaps you would agree, that different styles may be right for different types of judges. For example, what do you think would best evoke an appellate judge known for abstruse and tedious opinions, which I suspect is how some of you may view a lot of our handiwork? Well, you know, several possibilities present themselves, but I tend to think abstract expressionism, maybe a la Jackson Pollock's strip paintings, would do nicely for that judge. Similarly, to convey the unique judicial perspective of the great dissenter judge who sees everything differently from the rest of the court, the artist reasonably might employ the Cubist style of Pablo Picasso. Eric, however, is not a jurist of either of those types, so those styles would not do for him. I do suppose that many of us, including myself, would hope for realism rather than abstraction in a portrait. In particular, I'd say the genre of realism, sometimes called magical realism. With magical realism, the artist ensures that the subject will forever be remembered as thinner and better looking than anyone ever knew him or her to be. But I know Eric would spurn such a fundamentally meretricious aesthetic. And I will say with the utmost sincerity and enviousness that he does not need it either. In fact, I'm completely confident that the style of Eric's portrait will do him justice. Mr. Stevens is an artist of renown, and I have seen a number of his other portraits. Not only do they succeed in rendering the subject's physical appearance with integrity and vitality, they go on to convey an honest impression of the subject's essential character and inner strength as well. Eric Washington deserves no less. Thank you, and let us now to the unveiling.
Thank you, Judge Glickman, for those wonderful remarks about our beloved colleague. I believe the artist Bradley Stevens is making his way to the microphone, and we look forward to hearing from him. I feel like we should have a drum roll for you.
Oh, there's enough pressure already. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow. Good afternoon. I must say at the outset, I'm not a professional speech giver. I'm just an artist, so I'll do my best, and I will be brief. One of the best parts of my job, by far, is having the opportunity to meet people like Judge Washington. The first time I met him was in Judge Sullivan's chamber, memorable day. And if you ever want some entertainment, you should see the two of them together sometime. But I liked him instantly. As everybody has said already, he's so personable and down to earth and warm and engaging and obviously very smart. And so I knew I had a good subject, and we kind of hit it off. And it's not a necessity, but obviously that makes a portrait project that much more enjoyable. At these kind of occasions, I often think of a famous quote by John Singer Sargent, the 19th century American portrait painter. He said, "The definition of a portrait is a likeness where there's something wrong about the mouth." And what he was trying to express there was, when you think about it, it's quite a daunting undertaking. How do you sum up all there is, all the complexities, all the layers of a human being in one single image? It's impossible, right? But it's worth trying. And I've always said that of all the art, and I do other things too, I paint landscapes and various subject matter, but I think the most rewarding and the most challenging by far is portraiture, because of all the levels that it has to work on. And they told me to speak about the painting. It's kind of hard when it's still veiled as it is. But there's one thing I can assure you, that there is not a hidden shredder in that frame over there. Although I wish it was worth $1.4 million. But besides a good likeness, which obviously is one of the first prerequisites to a portrait, from an artistic standpoint, it has to work as a work of art as well. And maybe this is things that don't interest you all as much, but it has to have a good composition, has to have balance within that composition. It has to have color harmony, light and shadow, which we call chiaroscuro, brushwork. It's interesting, textures, gesture, movement, I could go on and on. So you can see that it's not easy doing a portrait, and I've been doing it for a long time, and you think after all these years I'd kind of have the hang of it, but for whatever reason it's not getting any easier for me. I think the more you know, the more challenging it is. And when I was a student, I used to have a studio literally right across the street from the National Portrait Gallery. And that's back in the day when it was kind of a sleepy, dank place and musty, and not too many people went in there. But I would go in there all the time. And I also would walk down to the National Gallery of Art and take advantage of a copyist program they have there. You've maybe seen artists work with easels in there. And I just took to it like there was no tomorrow. And I copied literally hundreds of paintings over many years. And to this day, that's where I generally say I learned how to paint, is from the masters. And people who go to law school do the same thing, right? You learn from the masters or prior case studies. So we share something in common. The first thing you'll probably notice, and it's been kind of hinted at here, is there's an iPad in the painting. Am I allowed to say that, or are we? And that was Judge Washington's idea. I didn't object, because he had a good reason. I guess the court was digitized under his tenure, and he kind of brought it into the 21st century, as Judge Glickman just mentioned. And so his left hand is holding an iPad. It's somewhat disguised, but hands are very important in a painting, because they should be engaged, they should be active, and I very much welcome in the challenge of painting hands, and you'll see that in the portrait. And I could go on and on, all the things that are going on in the portrait. There's a flag that Judge Washington wanted, the DC or the Court of Appeals seal, but I mentioned color harmony. We take the colors from the flag, and then there's elements of that red throughout the painting. So it kind of harmonizes together in his tie and in the kind of the wood coloring of the background. And but you're not here to listen to me speak. So I think without further ado, maybe we should look at the painting, and then I'll be glad to talk with all of you during the reception or at some point. But thank you very much.
This is where we have another drum roll, if we had one. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, but I'm going to ask Mrs. Cheryl Washington and Miss Erica Washington to come and unveil the portrait for us. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. All right, let's go. Oh, wow. Wow. I can see the angle, and I know some of my colleagues are eager to see it as well, but what I can see looks absolutely fantastic. Now, I guess we'll hear some remarks from the Honorable Chief Judge Eric T. Washington.
You'll forgive me if I try to stick to a script. As you heard from those who spoke before me, there are so many people and so many emotions that I am feeling right now that to allow me to go off script might prevent us from getting to that reception and enjoying each other's company for some time. And so please bear with me. I can't tell you, it is both surreal and humbling to be standing here today looking at, or a portrait looking back at me, and listening to people that I care deeply about and really admire. I've presided over a similar ceremony for my former colleague, Chief Judge Judith Rogers, and I've attended any number of ceremonies of portrait presentations and unveilings. And yet I was not ready for the emotions that I actually feel today. What I do know is that I would not be standing here in front of you without the love and support of those of you in this room, as well as others who were not able to be here today. For that reason, I want to take my few minutes here really to say thank you to everyone for what you've done for me. See, Kim and Moxie started this. Kim and Moxie, you know, I'm not sure how best to thank you or to express my gratitude for your kindness, for your leadership in this effort to have my portrait presented to the court. You know, I think you know, I hope you know, how proud I am of each of you, both personally and professionally. And that goes for not only Kim and Moxie, but for all my children. They are my children. They are grown, they are accomplished, they are outstanding, but they're still my children. Steve, Judge Glickman, thank you very much for your kind and generous remarks today. As they say, I only hope that I can come close to resembling those remarks. Chief, thank you for your friendship and for presiding over the ceremony. Well, we are extremely lucky to have you sitting in that seat. Brad, not only have you done a great job of capturing me and the vision I expressed for my portrait, all except for Denzel's face, but it has been a pleasure and an honor to get to know you and your lovely wife, Patty. You have just been so gracious and so forgiving and so patient with me in this experience, but you have made this experience one that has truly been enjoyable, so thank you very much. And there's so many other people I have to thank, and so you're gonna have to bear with me also for a few minutes. We mentioned members of my family who are here. I was, well, while my niece, Whitney, and Brian, her husband, are here, my niece, Morgan, and her friend Axel both are here, and I want to thank them for coming and recognize them. There are so many people who have played a part in my life, but the first people that I have to thank were mentioned earlier by the chief, my parents, Ellaby and Gloria Washington. They couldn't be here today. They're in Atlanta, but they are not only hanging in there, they're moving and creating all sorts of excitement every day. But at 94 and 92, running up here was going to be hard. But they not only taught me to live by the golden rule, they also told me the value of hard work and the importance of being of service to others. And for that, it's the foundation for everything. To my village, and you know who you are because you're here. Thanks for always being there for me and for my family. Many of you I've known for longer than you want me to tell out here today. But you've always been there. You've helped raise my children, my biological children, and have been there to support me. You've been there to support my family, and I love you, and I'm so glad you're here. To my wife, Cheryl, and to our children. You met Erica as she unveiled, but my oldest daughter, Lindsay, who you heard about, and my son, Ricky. I thank you for understanding why, as Chief Judge, I was unable to be at home as often as I would have liked, and for your encouragement to be a visible presence at the bench and bar conferences and meetings and issues that I felt were so important both locally and nationally. To my colleagues on the court, the greatest court in the country, I can't thank you enough for the unwavering support you've given me over the years. Without it, of course, I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't have a portrait. Thank you. No. I have to especially thank Chief Judge Wagner. You know, it's one thing to have people recognize leadership potential in you. It's another thing to have people who are interested and invested in encouraging you to be the best you can be. And Judge Wagner, thank you for putting me in positions that provided me with a broader perspective of this court system than I could have ever gleaned by myself on my own. And while I was chief, a benefit that, of course, I had that my colleague and successor, Chief Judge Blackburn-Rixby, didn't have is I had two other chief judges who had been in the seat, who understood the challenges and were there to counsel me on a daily basis, in Judge Newman and Judge Pryor, who couldn't be here. Both of them, I had their ears, their support. The only challenge was they disagreed a lot. No, So ultimately, I had to make decisions, but it was okay. I had their help, and it was a wonderful thing. You know, as it was mentioned, as Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, you also have the responsibility of serving as the chair of the Joint Committee on Judicial Administration in the District of Columbia. And that is an extremely important role that we play, and we play on that committee. I had the honor and pleasure of serving with three chief judges of the D.C. Superior Court, Chief Judges King, Satterfield, and Robert Morin. And I want to thank all of them. It is the type of relationship that requires coordination and conversation and communication. And I want to thank them because they shared the strategic vision. We shared a strategic vision for the courts. And they, through their unbelievable efforts and their strength, helped to bring that vision into focus. And speaking of focus, it's wonderful to have a vision, as we all know. But I know Ann Wicks and the E-team, some of whom are here today, and especially the clerks of this court with whom I served, both Garland Pinkston and Julio Castillo, had to implement those visions, as did the clerks on the Superior Court and the administration over the court system. And I can't tell you, I understand. I want you to know that I understand it was much easier to have the vision than it was to implement the vision. And so thank you very much for your service. Judge Farrell, Glickman, and Fisher, they also served on the Joint Committee, and they played a pivotal role. Their participation was as invaluable as was their counsel to me. Thank you for being there and being involved in what were some good times, and being involved also through all the sequestrations, budget cuts, and other more challenging issues that the Joint Committee had to face. I am most thankful today for, of course, all of you, but especially my law clerks. Thank you for your patience and your perseverance, especially when it came to preparing draft after draft after draft, as I endeavored to get it right and to understand and to make sure that the best we were doing justice, or at least getting the question or the answers correct. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my administrative support, Sandy Straughter, Tracy Nuttall, and Sherilyn Walker Turner. Not only did they provide administrative support for me, they, in many ways, Tracy and Sherilyn especially, made the effort and made it a part of their responsibilities to try to bring the court together through social functions and to make us a real family, to promote the collegiality that was spoken earlier. And so to them, I want to thank them. That doesn't count the late night calls to change plane reservations or hotels that I didn't have when I arrived places because I'd forgotten to tell them I was going, and things like that. But I do want to thank them. So I hope all of you know how important you are to me and how important this day is. And I thank you all for sharing it with me. Thank you.
think at this point, Chief Judge Washington and Mrs. Cheryl Washington and family would like to invite everyone out to enjoy reception and refreshments and to have a look at the portrait. So at this time, we stand adjourned. Thank you.